We've got some fresh new young talent doing some things that I know you haven't heard before.
1, 2, 3, listen.
Welcome to Finances, your home for all things financial, investment, money and lifestyle. Hosted and curated by the very talented team of certified financial planners at Burke Financial Partners. All right, let's talk aged care.
The importance of, if you think it might be a possibility, start the process with your application for the care packages, get the ACAT assessment done sooner rather than later, because once you start moving through the levels, you get level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, the home care packages at least, they take months and months and months to get through. Like, you can't suddenly decide. And just chatting with a lovely client at 9 o'clock this morning, and they've decided they need to revisit. They moved into an aged care village, the retirement village I should say, and they decided they need to revisit the home care stuff, but because they've got to reinstate it, they're being told it's 11 to 13 months before they'll actually get the home care package granted. And
so why is that? Why is it so? Well, what's with the delay? Is it just because of the volume of people?
I think it's partly volume and partly providers and service provision, because you can get the aged care assessment task done, so that's step one, and you have all of them. That in itself takes some time. It's it could be 3, 4, 5, 6 months to actually get the formal aged care assessment done and classify people at level 1 through to level 4 for the entitlements that go with it. That's the home care package at the beginning. But then actually getting a provider, like having providers that can come and provide that home care service, but without getting through to level 3, level 4, the chances of getting into an actual aged care facility. So if you're thinking, and I've been saying this to a lot of our clients in recent times, ones who health issues are starting to become a problem, let's start the process. Let's just get the aged care assessment done, work out whether we can get level 3 or level 4 category, and eventually there will be some financial packages that come to you that you can make use of at home, but you're in the system then. And if you need respite care, you can find a home somewhere nearby that can offer a week or two's respite care. I think there's something like 60 days a year that you're entitled to respite once you get the packages. But it doesn't happen straight away because, oops, I've got really bad health, I'm looking after my partner, I can't cope anymore, I better get an aged care assessment. You're still a year away, probably, before something actually happens. It's really scary. So start early.
All right, you've jumped about 4 steps.
1,000 ways, sorry.
Anyway, that's all good. So let's we better do a little introduction. So I think this is either episode 18 or episode 6. I really don't know now whether they're all in different order. So I'm Jay Burke, Director at Burke Financial Partners. I'm joined today by Principal and Founder at Burke, Master of all things aged, Peter Burke.
Very personal.
Good morning, PB.
Lovely to be here, Jay, again, and hopefully we can just give a little bit of clarity and a bit of direction to lots and lots of people out there with this discussion around aged care and the complexities and issues with aged care.
Yeah, it's a difficult one to navigate in a conversation like this because, well, you particularly, having had lots of experience in aged care, it's easy to dive into sort of the strategy of it. So what I thought we'd try to do today was just start with a bit of an overview of why aged care and residential aged care is so prevalent at the moment, and it's relatively obvious, yes. The fact that we have an aging population. And that we're seeing many clients and also children of clients thinking about their parents and also themselves. Yeah. So, you've been in the game now for, we've just had our 21st anniversary, but 25, 26 years in.
26 and a half almost now, yeah.
So maybe just talk about the prevalence of, as you've seen it, of aged care and residential aged care, and also advice around aged care in your time.
Well, I think the key thing is that we, over the last quarter of a century, it's a bit scary that I've been in this for more than a quarter of a century, but number one, the health systems are so much better, the medical services, medical science is so much better, that people are living longer, there's no question, and the average life expectancy of males and females has jumped out by 4 or 5 or 6 years over the last quarter of a century. And on top of that, we're realising that there is this fantastic capability of people, government funding to support aged care so that you don't have to keep someone who is really unwell in the home and have the carer then get really unwell trying to care for that person when, it's lovely people don't want to give up on their partners, their family members, but at some point in time they need professional help so you can love them, not have to care for them as 100% of the time. And I think that sort of awareness of the fact that aged care facilities now are getting better, and still massive shortfall in funding and massive shortfall in staffing numbers and so on, and one would hope that over the next couple of years, a lot of the promises that were made pre-election, that there will be really substantial changes to the wages for our aged care workers, the funding of aged care, the resourcing of aged care broadly, so that we can have a much, much greater capability to provide. But scarily, we're only at the tip of the iceberg now. Like the next decade, the numbers of people that'll be in their late 70s, 80s into their 90s, potentially requiring aged care services, is going to almost double. Like, the proportion of people that are currently funding taxes to help cover all of this, and the proportion of people using it is almost going to flip. Instead of 40-60, it's going to be 60-40 over the next decade by 2030. So it's pretty scary. We've got to make sure we understand it, and we've got to resource it really well.
You mentioned before we started recording, or maybe we're recording, I'll extract it out, but just how it's a difficult area for a couple of reasons. It's a significant life event which creates a lot of emotional concerns for people and difficulty, but also just the navigating the rules and regulations of aged care assessments and the costs. And maybe let's just talk a little bit about some of those difficulties broadly, and then we'll get into things like the aged care assessment, the rundown of things like the costs and fees associated.
Yeah, well, I think the number one, we almost take it for granted because it's something we deal with all the time. But for the uninitiated, the unaware, it's a very confronting thing. And if you, as a member of a family, whether it be your parents or your partner, are suddenly confronting the thought that maybe we can't continue to cope with this person by ourselves at home, we might need home care, or the next step is that full-time aged care thing. That apart from the uncertainty about the financial implications, the uncertainty about the application process, how do we go about it, the uncertainty about what services are provided, even if I do apply, on top of that you've got that a huge emotional impact. So I think it's really important that people don't try to navigate that all themselves. And with our clients, we have those conversations with them way, way, way in advance of the necessity of actually doing something. Just raising awareness, what we can do to help, how we can go through a process, the little things we can do early, because unless we start early, all of a sudden, when you do need it, it's still a substantial amount of time before you can actually get where you need to get, whether that be with a home care package or aged care provision of support in an aged care home.
So how early is too early? I had the question, when should people consider aged care planning options for themselves or for their parents? Like,
yep.
When do we start, and how do we start to think about it?
Yeah, well, I think obviously it depends. The answer is it depends. But I think with the majority of people with fairly normal aging, fairly normal health situations, you should, if you're getting to the point where sort of in your 60s, early 70s, and you're still funding life and managing life pretty well, but you can perhaps see, like 68 years of age and my body mechanically is starting to let me down. I mean, Esther and I are already thinking about adjustments to our lifestyle with, double-story home versus single-story home.
No stairs.
All that stuff, the things. And I think it doesn't mean you are suddenly planning to do a big let go of a family member and get rid of the problem. It just means that you are logically thinking about stuff. And I think in life broadly, if you go through the implications, you look at the possibilities, you consider all the alternatives, knowledge is gold. Like if you start to understand what it looks like, then when you get to the point where you need to start making decisions, you haven't got the whole box and dice to deal with. You've actually worked out the basic mechanics and the options and possibilities. Then you can start making some practical moves towards getting things working. So there is no sort of at 70, at 65. But again, if you've got health issues, those things can happen or need to happen much, much earlier. And the healthcare system, it's called, aged care, but it does also provide for younger people who might have disabilities, health issues of significant consequence. So it's not really about an age, it's about how you're coping and being prepared. It's never too early to understand it.
I was kind of relating it to things like retirement planning, where we talk about the earlier you can actually start to actually think about it, rather than putting your head in the sand and thinking, listen, I'll worry about that when I get there, at least starting the conversation thinking about what do I need to do now to prepare, because you know as well as I do that if you get a client that gets to age 60 and all of a sudden starts to think about only then about how they're going to fund their retirement, you're
getting almost to the too late point, aren't you?
Definitely, it's at the too late point. It's nearly every aspect of people's financial situation. The earlier you can at least consider it, look at your options, think about it realistically, not put your head in the sand and think that it won't happen to me. I think that's one of the issues just as humans in general. We don't think very well over expanses of time. So you think about how you are today, but you're not necessarily thinking how I will be in 20 or 30 years. And that's someone else. That's someone else that's going to happen
I'm still 30. I can still run a marathon. Ha ha. I wish. Yeah. It's interesting. I was talking to someone yesterday. We're talking about how when you're inside looking out, you still see who you were. But when you're outside looking in, you say, gee, that person's aged. Yes. It's a different perspective when it's you looking out.
Yeah, I said you looked a bit like Neil Mitchell. That was supposed to be a compliment as a radio presenter. But maybe
the other side of that planning and preparation stuff too is just removing some of the baggage of worry. Like, that little analogy about the lights are off and you're terrified because there's monsters behind you and you're scared to turn around. And you turn the light on and it's a cockroach in the corner. Like, we worry about so many things that we don't really know. They're not really there yet because we don't know. But if we can actually remove some of that uncertainty, and it doesn't matter whether you're 30 or 40 or 60 or 70, if you're starting to think about the future and the possibilities, let's remove a lot of the uncertainty, have a discussion, and then you can work out what needs to be done. And too many times we'll have, people will be talking to us and they're terrified about, I'm going to lose my home. I can't, what if going into aged care, how can I afford it? Well, that is just a worry that's an irrational worry because you don't know. Once you actually get the numbers, and which we can easily do, run numbers for people, give you some clarity around how it's going to work. And oftentimes, if you're a couple, actually financially you can find some improvements in your financial position because you're separated due to ill health, Centrelink possibilities increase and so on.
What are some of the other concerns that you see clients coming in? Rational or irrational concerns? You said, I'm going to lose my house, I'm not going to have enough income to fund the cost of aged care. Is there any other common concerns that people come in with that can be reasonably easily alleviated with some advice?
Yeah, well, I think one of it is the fact that I don't really want to leave our home, and I don't really want to have to put my partner in aged care. All right, well, you don't have to do that. Let's apply for, if one or the other of them, maybe both of them, are in a position to get some of the home care packages. Well, that's a financial support that allows you to access things like people helping to clean, helping to do the gardening for you, helping to keep a client in the house, but they're not forced to leave it because they can't maintain it anymore. And there's one lovely couple live on a few acres out of Bannockburn, and it was tough because the husband had a few health issues and trying to maintain that property was going to be really difficult. But by getting the home care package, they got help with maintenance of the home, but also help with maintenance of the gardens and things. And they were able to stay there with a smile on their face, didn't have to leave this beautiful home because they were getting some financial support and people coming in to do that for them. So they're sort of the emotional concerns, not just health concerns. Do I have to, at some point, put my partner into aged care? Do both of us need to go somewhere else because we can't cope with this home? Well, let's stay here as long as you possibly can. And that's one of the big incentives, which is a very big positive of the home care packages. It's much cheaper for the government to fund a few dollars, and they're not cheap, not a small dollar, but a few dollars to keep individuals in their homes than it is to put them in an aged care facility. So if you can do that and benefit from that, stay in your home a lot longer than you otherwise might have with support. Let's have a crack at making that work for you.
So let's talk about that in terms of getting an assessment. So how do you actually go about getting an assessment for either an aged care or home care package or potentially moving into residential aged care?
Well, it's a fairly standard aged care assessment task process, and it's just a matter of contacting Department of Human Services, and they send out their specialist people who come to the home and work through the paperwork, and there's application paperwork which we often will help our clients with, but the process is purely being assessed, and they assess then at a certain level 1, 2, 3, 4, and once that assessment is in place.
So just quickly, that assessment, is it ACAT or ACAS in Victoria? Is it Aged Care Assessment Service?
Yeah, I think maybe it was the Aged Care Assessment Task, but it's probably been renamed to the Aged Care Assessment Service. Yes,
Yep.
You're right. I still use the old ACAT, which is
okay.
the task itself.
I think you said Department of Human Service too. I think that's now the Department of
Health and Human Services or something, no?
Department of Family Inclusion and Equity or something like that.
Okay, beautiful.
So I've to rename it for some reason.
I should get with the new world, shouldn't I?
Yes, you should.
But again, that process, just getting someone to come along and finish that assessment or provide that assessment takes it's not an overnight process because lots of people are wanting it. And then once that assessment is actually formalised and they classify the individual or couple at a certain level, 1, 2, 3 or 4, it then requires a provider to come in and provide the services. So the granting of the dollar value for the package, then getting a service provider, and that's all outsourced. Most of it's outsourced to private groups who then you need to get somebody who suits you in your area that can come along and provide those services. And I suppose the layer beyond that is the actual home aged care, an aged care home for one or the other as well, which again, you've got to have a spot available. And sadly, someone has to leave that bed, that room, pass on before a spot becomes available. So the earlier you can get things in place, the better.
You were talking about that. Again, I'm not sure whether that was before we hit record, but just the length of time that we're seeing it take for people to get placement or to get assessed and then get placement. Another reason why you should be starting the process as early as you possibly can and getting advice as soon as you possibly can.
A perfect example. I chat to a lovely client this morning, and he and his wife are now in a retirement village, but prior to that they had the aged care home package, which they were using at their previous home. And then when they went to the retirement village, they decided they didn't need it, downsized a lot of the services provided, but they now realise, due to health issues, that they do need it again. They've gone back to ask for it to be reinstated, but they're being told it's 11 to 13 months. And they've already been in the system. They've already had the assessment and significant health issues. So you can't leave it until it's too late. You've got to prepare early.
Let's talk about one of the common queries that people have around the costs of aged care, and I've noted a couple here, but maybe let's talk through the fees associated with residential aged care, the basic daily fee, the accommodation payment, the means tested fee, and sort of other service charges. Let's go there.
Well, just quickly first, when there can be some daily fees if you have the home care package. They can quote you a daily fee, but quite often it's a modest amount, but quite often that is absorbed into the package. So when a lot of our clients are being told, oh yes, there's a home care package available, it'll cost you this much per day, but that is the maximum it can cost. And if you happen to be getting benefits like Centrelink or whatever, that often is not. It's waived, and the package can be, it might be $9,000 a year, $15,000 a year, $50,000 a year, depending on your level, and most of that is absorbed. So you don't normally have a huge cost, although it'll be quoted at the beginning. But when you have to go into aged care itself, there's the standard fee which everyone has to pay, which is just the...
Let's try and get the terminology, because I know there's lots of different terminology for each of these, but let's start. So that you're talking about the basic
daily fee,
Yep.
yeah. And in essence, it's set up as if you've got nothing, and so for the person who has got nothing except surviving on the age pension, it's the equivalent of around about 75-80% of the single age pension. So around about $18,000 a year, which comes back to about I think it's $51 a day.
Oh, I tested you there. I printed it out. So as of March to June 2022, it's $54.69 per day.
Okay, the $54.69 a day, and you multiply that by the 365 days of the year, it comes in at around about 3/4 of the single age pension. The premise behind that is that even if you are totally financially destitute and all you get is the age pension from Centrelink, you're a single person with the age pension, you can afford to be in aged care, and there's a bit left over to cover other things for you. So the other benefit is that if you are a couple and one of you has to go into aged care, you then both move to the single rate pension due to separation due to ill health. So whilst as a couple you might be on about maximum $720 a fortnight each, single rate, if you're separated due to ill health, jumps up to about $930, $940 a fortnight each, which again easily covers that basic daily fee. The second fee, which has to be calculated, and we've got calculators we can do that for all of our clients, is the means tested fee. And as it says, it's the means tested fee. It depends on your means. And it can be a bit scary. You think, oh, this is going to be a huge cost. But when we do the numbers, especially if it's a couple and one person goes into care, only 50% of the assets are counted. The home is removed from the assessment, so that doesn't count because someone needs to stay living in it. It doesn't end up being prohibitive.
So let's just explain its means testing. You said it's based on people's means, but explain what means testing actually is.
Okay, so if I've got $1 million worth of financial assets, which include things like superannuation, pensions and so on, share portfolios, managed funds, bank accounts, and if I happen to have an income stream, like I might have a defined benefit income stream, they do count as part of all this means test, what income you receive from Centrelink at that time, if you do receive any. So it's a combination of an income assessment and an asset assessment, and from that, the formula just works out what you can afford to pay without having to deprive you or have you get rid of all those assets. So it is your means, your asset value, and it doesn't count things like your cars and contents, like those things that are just personal assets, but any financial assets are included in the means test. If it happens that you are a single person and you go into care, the family home is assessed as part of that total means testing calculation, but there's a cap which at the moment is give or take $170,000. So there's no matter what the home is worth, they only include in the means testing fee. It's plus or minus. It's marginally above or below 170. It was about 167,500 a little while back.
I think I've got it. It's 178,839.
Okay, it's gone up a little bit. Yeah. So it's that figure, and again, and with home values these days, most of them are worth a lot more than that. So that figure is used for the means tested fee.
Is there a cap on the means tested fee?
Yeah, that's great. Great point, Jay. That's why a lot of people get worried, because when we do the means testing, when we do the calculations, I should say, it could come in that the client might potentially pay $30,000 or $40,000 a year if they're fairly well off in the means tested fee. But there's an annual cap and a lifetime cap, and so the annual cap is give or take 27 grand. Again, I can't quote the exact figure.
I can quote it for you. So the annual cap is 29,399.40.
Yeah,
yep,
okay.
So 29,399.
If my daily fee, my daily means tested fee, is going to give a cost of 50 grand a year, for example, when you get to that $29,000 figure, it stops for the rest of the year. But the second, it's a positive negative in a way, but there's also a lifetime cap, and so the lifetime cap is something close to 70 grand probably.
You're getting pretty close, $70,558.
Yeah, and so if I pay 29,000 year one and 29,000 year two, about a third of the way through year three, I'm going to reach my lifetime cap, and so the means tested fee then stops. As long as that individual stays alive in that aged care facility, they do not pay the means tested fee again. And I suppose it's a sad indictment on ageing, but the average life expectancy of a person in aged care is 2 to 3 years. It's about 2.5 years. So that calculation is based on the average person living for the amount of time they might be in aged care. But it can't possibly destroy your financial well-being. That's the key. It protects everyone's financial situation.
All right, we've covered basic daily fee. We've covered the means-tested fee. Let's talk about the accommodation payment, which obviously gets people concerned when they see the quantum of lump sum that maybe they have to come up with.
And that's now called the refundable accommodation deposit. RAD is the RAD is the term we use. And that figure varies from home to home, and it varies from room to room in a home, depending on what sort of room you might want.
I was going to say, what people ask, why does that vary? Why does that lump sum amount that they quote, the RAD, why does it vary so much from facility to facility?
Okay, well, if you go to a country town and you've got an aged care facility in a country town, it's sort of loosely based on property values, because if someone has to go into care, give or take, what's it worth if you took the value of your home and put that into an aged care home room? So, as country towns, it could sort of range 250 to 400 or 500 in Geelong. I think it usually starts off at around about 350, runs up to about 600. But if you went to Sydney, you could pay $1 million for that RAD. So I think there is, and when this was set up by the federal government a handful of years ago now, this fairly clear script or calculations and all these things. I think if the figure was in excess of 500, and it's probably higher than that now, the home itself, if they wanted to charge more than 500, needed to get approval for that. So they needed to be, explain why it needed to be more than $500,000. That's probably quite a bit higher now, but the point is that you don't have to go to a home and pay 500 or 600, and even in the home itself, there a lot of the Geelong places, you can pick something at 350, 400, 450, 500, 600, depending on the quality of the room. There might be a lovely place like the Multicultural Aged Care Centre over in North Geelong, have beautiful rooms with their own little en-suites and own little kitchenette areas, with doors that open out into a little garden area. You can put garden furniture outside. They're a bit more expensive because they're for people that probably are not needing 100% high-level care. They're still a little bit independent. But then, if the person going into care is not going to benefit greatly by a lovely little outside garden, well, you can still have really nice rooms because they have fantastic shared facilities and all the stuff that's done in the aged care facilities to entertain, provide social contact, companionship. They have great facilities. So the choice would be up to the individual person, family members, about what level of RAD they might pay. But, sorry, question.
No, I was just going to say one of the things that you mentioned earlier is one of the concerns that people come to us regularly is, how the hell am I going to fund that? They see that lump sum amount, that RAD, the refundable accommodation deposit amount of $500,000, and they think, shit, how are we going to fund that?
Spot on. And I think that's the beauty of it is they're very flexible. And so there's a range of ways. You can do a daily accommodation payment instead of the lump sum refundable accommodation deposit.
So let's just slow down on that one. So we've got the RAD, which is the lump sum payment. If you choose to pay it in a lump sum, you can, however, pay a daily accommodation payment, which reflects what?
It's just an interest rate on the... so let's say the figure we chose for... the room we chose is going to cost us $500,000. Well, if you haven't got $500,000 in hand at the moment, you can say, well, I won't pay the $500,000, but I'll pay the specified, and it's government regulated, the specified interest rate,
which is... take a guess at what it is?
I reckon it might be 4.75 or 4.8% at the moment.
Okay, well, I've got it at 4.07 as of for residents entering into aged care 1st of April 22 to 30 June 22.
Okay, good. That obviously didn't go up with the recent rate rise, which is pleasing. I had a thought that it was around 4.5.
Tipping it probably will after the end of the quarter.
Yeah, quite possibly. But if at the moment that interest rate, which is a bit more expensive than what you might earn on money in a term deposit or a bank account, but if you haven't got the money and you want to do this for a period of time, then that interest rate is a way of not having to suddenly sell a home or relinquish a whole heap of financial capital at a bad time. So it gives you some choice. But the in-between option is to say, well, I can put down a partial lump sum and I can only pay interest on the residual balance. But also there's great flexibility in the aged care system. Just because you make a decision at the beginning of your tenure in an aged care facility, you can put more against that lump sum amount at any point in time. So that gives the opportunity to say, well, I don't want to sell the home in a hurry. Probably happy to sell the home, but let's take our time, make sure we get the price, present it as well as we can, will happily pay the daily accommodation payment interest cost, daily, weekly, monthly, until we get the funds from the sale of the home. Then we can take it in and pay off the balance or some part or all of the refundable accommodation deposit and remove that interest cost.
Now, it's in the name of the deposit, refundable, but just to explain what happens at the end of someone's time in aged care, they've passed, what happens to that deposit?
All right, again, if you use that, the example, $500,000 RAD, at the point the person passes, it comes back directly to the estate of the deceased, and there's no money taken from it. Going back, goodness me, time flies, 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago now, since this new system was introduced, there was a proportion of the accommodation deposit that was kept by the facility, but that's no longer allowable. So whatever number is put down as the refundable accommodation deposit, every dollar of that comes back. You lose the right to use it, obviously. The home aged care facility uses it for their benefit. But when the person passes, it then goes through the estate.
Now, are there instances where the RAD is not required? So where the RAD is not, someone doesn't have to pay that accommodation deposit?
Absolutely. Well, we have funded situations where a person might not have means, and so the Commonwealth Government, the rules allow there to be some assistance with that. So if you're an assisted resident, and that's again a calculation that's done at various levels, but look, the individual must be left with a minimum amount in cash reserves, and I think that figure's just under $50,000 that they must be allowed to keep. They can't be asked to put that sort of money into their care costs. So if a person, for example, had just a bank account and the age pension, they would not be required to pay the RAD. They wouldn't probably have any means-tested fee. They'd hand over that 75-80% of their single-age pension, and there are a number of spots that the aged care facilities are required to have for funded, supported residents. So a person who hasn't got anything can't be denied access ahead of someone who might be able to pay the RAD. Those extra costs are basically covered by the federal government.
How many, do you have figures on how many supported residents a facility has to have?
It's a good question, mate. I don't.
Yeah.
No, I don't. But I think there's a proportion, and again, even private facilities, if they're getting government support, government funding, are required to offer support places for supported residents. So, if it's a fully government-funded facility, there would be more, and the private facilities probably not as many. But in order to get any government support, there is a requirement that they do provide positions, places for supported residents. And we've done a number of situations where you've got a couple, we've done the numbers, and because of the assets that have to stay in the ownership of the person who isn't going into care, they almost become a fully supported resident. And because the assets that are ignored, like the family home is ignored if one person needs to stay in it, and 50% of the assets that they have as a couple are still left in the name of not used for that assessment. So if you do have to have some share of the costs, it would become a daily cost, which still sits inside the capacity to generate income without having to hand over a big lump sum.
There's a fourth schedule of fees in some instances, and I think it's called many different things: additional charges, extra services charges. What do they cover?
If, for example, you wanted to have a weekly hairdo, like you wanted to have a weekly service that's a bit outside the normal care that's provided by the home, if they wanted to have somebody coming in on a regular basis and providing a little bit of extra pampering for the person, if they wanted there's some things like medications and so on are obviously a cost above and beyond, but there's a lot of the homes will offer extra services, and they vary from home to home. And you can
kind of the bells and whistles.
Yeah, you can pick and choose the bits you want, and again, it really depends on the health of the individual, the capacity of the individual to get benefits from those extra services, whether the family feel that they're worthwhile or not. Some of that stuff can be provided privately by the family. You don't have to have them scheduled by the home. So it's a very variable, but they're available, and those costs are not massive, but that is an extra cost that you can choose It's not mandated, it's an option offered by the home.
Now, having been in the aged care space for a while, I'm sure you've got a couple of stories of, without naming names, obviously, of situations gone bad where people have maybe made bad decisions around aged care that have got themselves into trouble. The few that I can think of are people trying to preemptively move around property ownership to try and benefit themselves in the future. And then on the flip side to that, maybe some scenarios of aged care outcomes that have happened or
worked out
out really well.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think that the thing you need to be very careful about is if you're starting to change the ownership of assets to try and minimise what you might have assessed against you before aged care happens, there's a 5-year look back. Anything that changes ownership has got a 5-year gifting. It remains assessed against the individual for 5 years if you've given it away. And if you give it away for an unrealistic amount, then it's a deprivation calculation done because you're actually depriving yourself. And so situations like that, we find where that's been done 2, 3, 4 years ago to try and, in not the right way, try and anticipate and be prepared, all that does is that you've got lost an asset, but you still have to have the expenses that are calculated because it creates a negative possibility or negative situation completely. And the other thing that often a lot of families think they're helping, where the children, for example, of the person going into care will say, look, I'll fund the bond, the refundable accommodation deposit for you, just so that we don't have to worry about the cash flow cost then over time. But the problem with that is that removes it from you, the gifter. You've lost that asset because the asset then at the deceased person's passing belongs to them. That moves into their calculation, into their estate. But the second disadvantage of that is that you may well be paying something that you don't need to pay, because if you haven't got the capacity to pay that refundable accommodation deposit, you could well be an assisted resident. And so, that's why, again, being careful, don't make any major financial decision without checking before you do, because you can actually create almost an irreversible negative if you do it badly, do it the wrong way.
I didn't mention at the beginning, but I had there noted, like the estate planning considerations, which you've just mentioned. It's not only the considerations in the lead up to and when someone's in aged care, it's what's the flow-on effect beyond that, beyond them no longer being with us, that might have some adverse impact. And again, I know we say this ad nauseum, but get advice early. Go and seek advice early. Talk to someone and start considering the implications, and you'll be in a better position. On the flip side, good outcomes that you can think of where you've had a great outcome with people with aged care.
Yeah, well, I think there's really good examples of where if you do have a conversation in advance and can prepare correctly, if you can put yourself in the right position in anticipation, then we can in some instances significantly minimise the costs. Just an example, if we've got a person who's still a member of the couple that's still under age pension age, well, if we move any allocated pension money into the name of that person and have it in the name of that person in super, not in pension, it remains a non-assessable asset like the family home if someone has to keep living in it. And so there are many ways that we can actually, legally, correctly, creatively manage things. And I had one client who ended up going into care after a bad stroke, and we adjusted significantly where all the assets sat, and he became a fully assisted resident. And it was, he had the very small fee on top of the basic fee, but it was well manageable. And the original calculations, it probably ended up saving at least $1,000 a month of fee costs by just getting the assessment, getting the figures right before we provided the final assessments to the aged care facility. So there's always ways to try and improve it a bit, and sometimes it's impossible to improve it, but just making it clear that it's not going to be prohibitive is also not a bad outcome. Running the numbers, doing the modelling and saying, this is more than manageable. I just did some calculations for another couple in anticipation of, sadly, the husband's suffering dementia, which is running downhill a little bit too quickly, as it does. And when we went through the figures, this couple at the moment are not entitled to any age pension. But in anticipation of one of them having to go into aged care, becoming separated due to ill health, and having, the really nice thing is from a Centrelink perspective, the refundable accommodation deposit, that lump sum, becomes a non-assessable asset like the family home. So we will be in a position with this couple, when they decide it's right and time, to pick up 2/3 of the age pension for he and her. It's a sad situation that's created it, but financially that's a really positive outcome, because the large part of his costs then will be covered by an age pension entitlement that they haven't got at the moment, they're not entitled to at the moment. So again, it's there's lots of possibilities that you don't need to freak out about. Have a chat to us. Let's have a look through the numbers and model it, and we can give you some comfort and clarity.
Well, it's a good way to wrap it up. Maybe just in closing, any advice to those seeking guidance? You've said seek advice early. Any other advice, without being specific advice to people's circumstances? What do you say to those people who are in that position where they're thinking about either their parents or themselves, and either home care, aged care? What have you got to say to them?
Well, I think probably even it's very easy for us to say, come and get advice from us, because that's our business and what we'd like people to do. I think the best thing people can do is find someone who's actually gone through that aged care process, either with advice or without advice, and just listen to their conversations and the stresses or lack of stress, the removal of stress, that getting advice, getting support is provided for them. And we had a lovely referral came into us through last year. The couple, Geelong couple, but mother of one of them lived interstate, and it was a really difficult thing because they were a fair way away and she was having to go into aged care. Well, they sat down with us, and within 4 or 5 weeks we were able to run all the numbers, put all the things in place. And the upside for them, if anyone spoke to that couple, they just keep raving about how thankful they are. Both still working, still challenged by life in many, many ways. And the emotions of being distant from a parent who's going through really bad health, and the thought that they needed to put this parent into aged care from a distance, flying backwards and forwards interstate to do that, those stresses and time costs alone were massive. But to say, well, look, we'll let you guys sort out the financial stuff. Tell us how to make this work as best we can. And yeah, the house, they thought that they'd have to sell the house in a hurry to have the money. That was their immediate thought when they came into us. Well, I know we've got to sell the house. We need the money in a hurry because we're going to have to put mum into aged care. Well, no, you don't. And when all of a sudden we took that time pressure away from them, they ended up selling the house still, and they used it to fund the deposit. But it was a much, much better outcome because they removed a huge part of their worry bag. They just dropped it on our table and went away and worried about the things that mattered to them, the emotional stuff. So,
very good. Well, let's close it out. Let's wrap it up there. Thanks, PB, for your time. It's always good to let you off the leash and just start to talk about things that you've got lots and lots of experience on. And I think, as you said, talking to people that have had experience in the past is critical. I know we've got plenty of experience in this office in aged care, and even the purpose of this podcast is to have something that people can share. So if you're listening to this podcast and you know someone who could maybe benefit from listening to how aged care works, or they need to talk to someone who's got some experience, then pass it on. Share the love and have a listen. So thanks again, PB. Look forward to you being on the next episode.
My pleasure, mate. Thanks for the time. It's good fun chat.
Any information contained in this podcast is of a general nature only. No account was taken as to the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. Therefore, before making any decision, listeners should consider the appropriateness of any information with regard to their particular objective, financial situation, needs, and seek independent advice from a licensed professional specific to their circumstances.
All right, hit it.
That translates to don't be a moron and act on what some random person says on a podcast. Take personal responsibility, do your homework, ask questions, and speak to an actual human that knows what they're talking about before you do anything. PB Financial Solutions Proprietary Limited, trading as Burke Britain Financial Partners, are authorised representatives of AMP Financial Planning Limited, AFS licence number 232706.